So, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, on behalf of Thalassemia International Federation, I would like to welcome you all, to each one of you, for participating in this webinar. And allow me please to particularly express my gratefulness to our eminent speakers of today's webinar, Dr. George Kassianos, Dr. Paul Telfer, a long-term medical advisor of TIF, Dr. Nicolas Diadis from Cyprus University, Dr. Gianluca Forni from Italy, once again, a long-term collaborator of TIF, and our friend Dr. Ahmed Mostafa Farag Soliman from the Dubai Thalassemia Center. So allow me please to start with a short presentation as an introduction, and then give the floor to our eminent speakers who will shed light on a very important subject that concerns all of us, and in particular the patients that we represent, the patients with thalassemia. So, έχει ένα slide μπροστά, Roy. This is not the first one.
Yeah.
So, okay, we are ready to start. Yes? So, just for the very few that are not aware of Thalassemia International Federation, it's a patient-oriented, non-governmental organization working in official relations with World Health Organization since 1996, and in more current years with United Nations Social and Economic Council, with the European Commission, and even more currently, having a participatory status at the Council of Europe. The Thalassemia International Federation promotes and safeguards the rights of patients with thalassemia, and in more current years extended to other hemoglobin disorders, including sickle cell disease, in the context of more than 200 national thalassemia associations across 62 countries of the world, in the 6 regions of the world as these are defined by World Health Organization. And its vision, which has always been the promotion of equal rights of all patients to quality health and other care, has mandated its mission, which for its realization is the promotion of national disease-specific control programs that encompass both the management and prevention components in the context of a national healthcare system, patient-centered and based on universal coverage. Now, between March 2020 and March 2021, TIF has tried in as many ways as possible to contribute to the work of national thalassemia associations and many collaborators at the treating centers, by developing and distributing widely, on many occasions translating in many languages, information material on the virus, its clinical outcome. And 3 of its major contributions to the global patient community have been the proposal for hemoglobinopathy patient pathway, so as to provide a guidance, only a guidance on which others to base their structure, on safe access of patients to their treating centers, on the safety of blood and blood donations during such infectious outbreaks, on the development of vaccinations and therapeutic drugs updates, which are updated quite regularly, sometimes on occasions weekly or every 15 days, to keep our patients updated timely and with reliable information. And another key contribution, we believe, has been the classification of patients into different risk groups based on their comorbidities. TIF, in addition, has published during this time regarding its contribution to the patients, either as a federation on its own or jointly with other collaborators across the world, and has, of course, issued position statements on critical issues regarding the inclusion of the patients into the vulnerable groups at the national level, and later on its position regarding vaccination and prioritization of these patients at the national level. We are very happy and pleased with the fact that the work of TIF has been referred and adopted by several ministries of health, as well as many international medical bodies, particularly with reference to the pathway that we had proposed, as well as the division and classification of risk groups amongst these patients. We have had a number of virtual meetings, webinars, included this information in social media, and we have been widely disseminating our information, very importantly through our expert patient panel. I'm not going to go through, but just to show the contribution of TIF in proposing some hemoglobinopathy patient pathways during this period of time, both with regard to the transfusion-related activity as well as to the non-transfusion-related access of patients to treating centers. This is a latest version of the classification of patients into different risk groups based on their different comorbidities. That was a guide to many national thalassemia association groups and treating physicians across the world. So the information that and the data that we have used in our work had been initially from the UK and Italy, not only because the treating doctors there are part of our international advisory board for many years now, but because both of these countries have very structured hemoglobinopathy groups that are collecting and analyzing appropriately the data, and therefore we could use some of this data initially in informing our patients across the world. Later on, of course, there was a flow and still is a flow from relevant health bodies like World Health Organization, ECDC, CDC, AABB, EMA, and FDA. And we're very proud to announce that this material has been distributed, disseminated across the world through our own patients, the TIF's patient advocacy groups, and also in the context of a number of webinars, which are more than 25 to date. There is an ongoing collection of information. We are very thankful and acknowledge the support of all the medical advisory board members, but also all the national treating physicians who are sharing information with us. Just to allow our eminent guests to understand some of the work that we have done in the context of collecting information, it was important for us to realize what the main challenges our patients were facing during the COVID pandemic. And of course, as you see on this slide, that is part of the conclusions of a very long survey that took a year to complete, was of course the disruption of basic care, including blood transfusion therapy and iron chelation, blood shortages, moderate to severe blood shortages, significant changes in the frequency, sometimes severe interruption and no access to transfusion therapy at all, temporary halt of chelation therapy, interruption of chelation therapy, and of course, these were of great concern to Thalassemia International Federation. In a lot of countries, there was a tendency to return to family friends donation. There was a lot of reporting on provision of whole blood in a number of patients in a number of countries, and provision of blood older than the recommended age, just to report that more than just over 68% reported receiving blood in a number of countries more than 28 days old. Now we're in the era of vaccination, and our patients are concerned with the vaccination, the level of protection that the vaccination offers, the level of vaccination coverage in their country, information about vaccines, their safety, their efficacy. Is there a choice of the vaccine to be provided to these patients, and to whom, based on the risk factors and the comorbidities of these patients? Of course, the position of Thalassemia International Federation is the position of World Health Organization, that it is an indisputable human right immunization, and it is the best health investment money can buy. And this is the position of TIF for our patients. However, we know that thalassemia is a multi-organ, is characterized by a multi-organ disease, and therefore we've gone through the recommendations offered by medical professional associations, including the Hematology Association, including the Study of Liver Disease, the International Transplant Association, the Endocrine Association, the Heart Association, the International Society on Thrombosis and Hemostasis, because very much so the, as I said, the European Endocrine Association, just to review, because all these are comorbidities very much faced by our patient population. And in fact, where more than 80% of our global population resides in the low and medium income countries, are there where the quality of care is suboptimal, less than optimal, well less than optimal. And the poorer the quality, of course, the higher the comorbidities, and all these are comorbidities that are met in thalassemia. And all of these professional bodies are recommended vaccination with any of the 3 authorized vaccines as a priority to these patients. This is not to be read, not to be analyzed, but to take my word, this is work done by Thalassemia International Federation in the context of its commitment to World Health Organization. And all it shows is the many unmet needs of patients across the world. In fact, the greatest majority of patients the needs of these patients are unmet. Even basic needs are unmet. What does this mean? This means that they are probably anticipating high rates of morbidity, therefore high needs for early vaccinations of these patients across the world. This is just a slide showing the vaccine the different vaccines that are circulated in the different countries, members of Thalassemia International Federation. It does not show the coverage of vaccines, but it shows that some level of vaccine protection exists, although the map very well demonstrates that many of our countries in yellow and in red will be late in receiving vaccine coverage, and therefore we are very concerned for our patients across the world. I'm ending this short introduction, passing on the floor to the eminent speakers, by hoping that the COVAX facility, the aim of which is to facilitate the participating countries, at the moment 190 countries, regardless of their income, to have access to COVID-19 vaccines. In those 190 countries, there are many countries that have high disease prevalence, and we are hoping that the COVAX facility, which is a combination of collaborations between CEPI, Gavi, the global vaccine, UNICEF and World Health Organization, supported by the European Union, will actually proceed to cover the needs of patients in these countries. Thank you very much. And my colleague, Dr. Mike Castagnodis, will pass on to the speakers.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to present the first talk, which has to do actually with the authorized vaccines, what they are. This is one of the most frequently asked questions to the Thalassemia International Federation from our patients all over the world. What vaccine must I choose? Is one vaccine better than the other? Now, to present the subject, I would like to introduce Dr. George Kassianos, He's the Immunization Lead for the Royal College of General Practitioners in the United Kingdom. He's been in that post, he's been there since 1996. He's also a founder member of the British Global and Travel Health Association, and various other UK bodies that have to do with viruses and viral transmissions, including polio, influenza, etc. He's on the editorial board of various journals. He has authored various research papers. I won't go into details, but above all, he's been awarded the CBE by Her Majesty, which is just an indication of his of the recognition of his work. Dr. Gracianos, over to you.
Thank you very much for your introduction. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk about the COVID vaccines we have today, how they work and how they compare. When Edward Jenner vaccinated little James Phipps, he was opening a new chapter in medicine, vaccinology. We managed to eliminate smallpox, but can we eliminate SARS-CoV-2 virus? That question today cannot be answered with a yes or a no. In order to be able to understand how vaccines work, we need to understand how the virus works. On the surface of the virus is the spike protein, which is actually the key that the virus uses to lock into the lock of our cells, the ACE2 receptor. And once it unlocks our cell, it gets into the cell and instructs the cell to produce many copies of itself. That's how it multiplies. The vaccines we have use generally three technologies. They can use the whole cell, the whole virus, but they inactivate it. They can use just the spike protein, or they can use genetic material from the spike protein. And indeed, we have got the messenger RNA, which was put together in the laboratory from material from the virus, which Pfizer and Moderna use. We also have AstraZeneca, Gamaleya, and Johnson & Johnson, which are using a viral vector. That's to say, a virus to transfer that spike protein to our cells. And that virus, the adenovirus, is harmless to humans, and they also remove the part of the virus that allows it to multiply, so it does not multiply. Therefore, the adenovirus, as well as the messenger RNA, they decay, they disappear very soon after they have delivered the spike protein to our cells. Novavax is using a protein subunit from the spike protein, and Valneva, Sinovac, and Sinopharm use the whole virus, but they inactivate it, they kill it. A question we get very frequently is, how comes that within 10 months, we're able to have a vaccine and we are vaccinated? This is too fast. Well, there are 5 reasons why we were able to really produce these vaccines so fast. The first reason is this: although it was not an influenza virus that we know very well, it was a different virus, but we had the technology ready. The messenger RNA and the viral vector technology, we're using it for Ebola, we're using it for cancers and so on. So we only needed the genetic sequencing from the Chinese to come to us, and immediately we're able to actually start putting together the vaccines. The second reason was that there was a huge collaboration between the scientists and the vaccine manufacturers, but also the government, the scientists and the vaccine manufacturers. And even there was collaboration between manufacturers of vaccines. One was producing the vaccine, and the other was actually producing the vaccine on behalf of the other manufacturer, which is great to actually see. The third reason was there was a huge investment of funds for putting together and testing the vaccines. The manufacturers put money in, the governments did so, the Gates Foundation and other charity organizations did exactly the same. The fourth reason was that we run the clinical trials really simultaneously. And the fifth reason was we use the emergency authorization. So normally, a vaccine will take about 2 to 3 years to be put together, will be tried on animals, then phase 1 in some people, phase 2 in hundreds of people, phase 3 in a large number of people, regulatory review, and then you have to market and promote it. What we did with SARS-CoV-2 vaccine was that the technology was ready. We went into phase 1 and phase 2 simultaneously. As soon after, we started phase 3, and we were producing the vaccine during those phases. Then we went into the rolling regulatory review and the vaccine approval. So what you see here, we were producing the vaccine while we were actually doing the phase 1, 2, and 3. In case they are safe and effective, in which case we can start vaccinating straight away. There was no need for promotion. It was emergency authorization. And we in the vaccination centers were ready to start as soon as the vaccine was available. The WHO asked the vaccine manufacturers to produce vaccines that are at least 50%, they have 50% efficacy. And of course, if you don't have a vaccine, 93% of your population will get infected. But if you actually start vaccinating people, you see the effectiveness of the vaccine. Effectiveness is when we give it to the population, while efficacy is in the clinical trials that we control. And you can see 50% effective, you have a great result, and even better when you actually go above the 50% towards 80%. Many times we're asked about, can we achieve herd immunity? Now that's actually difficult because it doesn't depend only on the coverage of the vaccine. It also depends on the efficacy of the vaccine, not only on the dominant variant that you have in your country, but also on the other variants that are actually coming to your country. And at the moment in Europe, we don't have just one variant, we have got 2 or 3. And in the UK too. So you have to have vaccines that actually cover the variants. Also, the reproductive number of the virus. If it's below 1, then that's fine. That's really great. But of course, we started with a virus that was actually having a reproductive number of 3 to 4. And the variants that are coming in actually have a much higher reproductive number than what our current variants have. So how do vaccines compare? The Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines use the messenger RNA technology, and Pfizer uses 2 doses at 21 days, the second one, and Moderna gives a second dose at 4 weeks, 3 weeks and 4 weeks. Both of them need to be kept in very low temperatures, minus 80 to 60 and minus 25. And once we put them in the pharmacy fridge, then for Pfizer, we have got 5 days, but in the UK, we cut it down to 3.5 days so that we don't lose any vaccine. And the Moderna, we have 30 days. But in room temperature, then the Pfizer, you really need to give it within 2 hours. But the Moderna allows you up to 12 hours. The efficacy I give you here is the efficacy in the original papers. And for Pfizer, it was 52% after the first dose and 94.6% after the second dose. For Moderna, it was 92 and 94%. As regards to efficacy in severe disease, the Pfizer was 89% and the Moderna 100%. AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson, Janssen in Europe, use the adenovirus as the vector. And the AstraZeneca uses 2 doses, the second dose at 28 days, but also we have got experience to 12 weeks interval. It can be in the fridge, which is great advantage, especially when we have to take vaccine out to go to care homes. And in a pharmacy fridge, it can be for 6 months there. The efficacy of the vaccine after the first dose was 64%, after the second dose, 70.4%. But when a low dose was given first, and then 12 weeks later, therefore that longer actually gap was given with a standard dose, the efficacy was 90% and 100% efficacy as regards to severe disease. And of course, we now have the United States study with Peru and Chile included 32,000 patients, where for mild disease, there was a 76% efficacy. And in fact, for the older adults, it was 85%. And for severe disease, it was 100%. Johnson & Johnson uses 1 dose. It has to be kept in -20, but once we have got it in the pharmacy fridge, we have got 3 months to give it. The efficacy of the vaccine in the United States was 72%, in Latin America 66%, and in South Africa 57%, and for severe disease is 85%. Currently, we are doing a trial to see what happens with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine when you give a 2nd dose. Novavax uses the protein subunit, delivers 2 doses, 3 to 4 weeks apart. It can be straight in the pharmacy fridge for 6 months, and an efficacy of 89% in the UK, but in South Africa, where there is a different variant there, it was 60%, and we don't know the efficacy in severe disease. The Gamaleya uses, again, the adenovirus as the vector, but they use a different adenovirus for the first and a different one for the 2nd dose. The thought of Gamaleya was that if you have the same virus delivered in both doses, the immune system may produce antibodies for the first virus and immobilize the 2nd. Well, it hasn't happened. We haven't seen that in the other companies that use adenoviruses. The Gamaleya needs to be kept in liquid form in -18 degrees. And once we put it in the pharmacy fridge, it can be there for 6 months in a freeze-dried formulation. Again, a very good efficacy and nearly 88% after the first dose and 91% after the 2nd dose and 100% for severe disease. The Sinopharm and Sinovac, both these companies use the whole virus and they have inactivated the virus. Again, 2 doses, it can be kept in the fridge. We don't know for how long. And we have not had any publication of phase 3 data. Therefore, we can only report what has been reported. And it is 50.4% for mild disease, 78% for mild to severe, that's in Brazil, 65% in Indonesia, and 91% in Turkey. Again, the efficacy for severe disease, we don't know. Now, it all depends how you interpret the data, because when you look at the Pfizer vaccine, in the original paper, you see an efficacy after the first dose of 52.4%. But that starts from day 0 when you had the dose on your arm. Well, we do know that young adults take about 2 weeks to show a good immune response, and older adults take a bit longer, up to 3 weeks. So you can see on the top there that at about 10 days, the lines for the placebo and the vaccine start actually diverging. So if you take the efficacy of the vaccine from day 10, it's 89%, not 52%. So you can see it all depends how you interpret the data. Now, the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunization in the UK was asked by the government to advise it as to who should be vaccinated first. What they did, they looked first at the proportion of all deaths, and they found that 98% of all deaths were in people aged 50 and over. So age was a very high risk factor. They also saw that 80% of all hospital admissions were again in the 50 and over. And they then calculated how many doses of the vaccine do you need to prevent 1 death. And in the case of residents in care homes for the adults, you only needed to give 20 doses of the vaccine to prevent 1 death. In the 80 and over, 160 doses to prevent 1 death. Coming down to the 70-year-olds, 600 doses. Going down then to 50-year-olds, you needed to give 8,000 doses to prevent 1 death. And in the under 50s, you needed to give 47,000 doses to prevent 1 death. So it was obvious how we needed to actually vaccinate it. Age and risk needed to come first. So priority group 1 were residents in care homes for older adults and also staff that work there. Priority 2 were everybody age 80 and over, but also the frontline health and social care staff. Very important. Priority 3 was 70 to 79. And when we go to priority 4, 70 to 74, at that point, we started also vaccinating those who are clinically extremely vulnerable. They are people who have had transplants. They have got active treatment now for cancer, severe COPD, severe asthma, adults with Down syndrome. we exclude the pregnant women with heart disease because that was from age 16 upwards. Then we went by ages, but when we got to 65 to 69, the next priority group was everybody age 16 to 65 in the clinical groups at risk: diabetes, heart disease, liver disease, kidney disease, and so on and so forth, respiratory disease. And then it was really the ages above 50. Everybody is 30 million there in that group, and we have got another 21 million under 50 to vaccinate. So did people come forward for vaccination? Tremendous response. We had, you can see here that the 70 and over is over 90% vaccination rate. And as you go down with the ages less, at the moment, we're calling in everybody age 50 and over who has not been vaccinated to get vaccinated. And we have got a huge campaign among people who are reluctant a little bit to get vaccinated to actually give them information and get them to come forward for vaccination. Very recently, the Public Health England published a paper which showed a robust antibody response in the 70 to 80-year-olds 3 weeks after they received the Pfizer vaccine. They also showed that there was no evidence of a boosting response to the second dose of the vaccine in those who were previously infected with SARS-CoV-2. So the question arises, should we be giving 2 doses or 1 dose to those who have had COVID-19 in the past, proven one? Currently, the JCVI in the United Kingdom and the WHO recommend 2 doses for these people. Here you see a very recent paper from Public Health England showing that by going quickly in and vaccinating people in December, January, and February, and giving 1 dose to tremendously large number of the population, we save 6,500 deaths. So 6,500 people in the UK today are with their families because of vaccination. As I'm a GP, when I finish this talk, I really need to give advice also how to achieve a healthy immune system. And really, we must not smoke. We need to eat a diet high in fruit and vegetables. We need to exercise regularly. Very important, maintain a healthy weight, because weight has been one of the highest risk factors for being admitted to hospital. Get adequate sleep, 8 hours and above is ideal. Minimize your stress and really take every step to avoid infection. Wash your hands frequently, cook the meat thoroughly, and take all the vaccines that are recommended for your age. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, the pandemic vaccines were available with 6 months. Yes, why? Because we had ready technologies. There was a huge collaboration and investment among everybody. The current vaccines we have, and we have used in the UK, there's 2 of them, Pfizer and AstraZeneca, exceed the WHO's target of 50% efficacy. They are proven to be safe and effective, and we do know that our vaccines and public health measures offer the best defense we have against this virus. We need to interrupt the transmission of SARS-CoV-2. That is our target. And of course, a virus which cannot transmit, you will find that has little chance to mutate and has little chance to actually form the variant. So we need to vaccinate and vaccinate and vaccinate. And I will leave you with the words of Louis Pasteur, who said that when meditating over a disease, I never think of finding a remedy for it, but instead a means of preventing it. Thank you very much for your attention.
We have agreed. Thank you so much for such a brilliant talk. Thank you so much for guiding us through the whole story. We have agreed on a previous, what's this occasion? Sorry, we have agreed with the speakers. Just a minute, some technical problem. Okay, so we have agreed when we had the preparatory meeting that we will receive 2 or 3 questions after each, and then as many as possible. Therefore, 2 or 3 questions for Dr. Kassianos. One of them has come from a board member, yeah?
No,
Quantum, can we see the questions? So let's see. Any news to how long of immunity does the vaccines give to vaccinated people? So the duration before revaccination, let's say. And then congratulations. How long? Σταμάτα, Ρόγια, να διαβάζουμε.
Just one question.
So, any news how long of immunity the vaccines offer? Well, the rest are congratulations for your presentation, Dr. Kassianos, and we will come up with more at the end because we have already a list here, but this is the first question. Are the vaccines effective for the new variants of coronavirus? Okay, thank you.
Sorry, was it the second question at the end? Did you give me a second?
Are the vaccines effective for the new variants of coronavirus?
Yeah. Okay. How long do they work? We cannot say for certain how long they work because we started vaccinating, well, the trials started in April last year. So we're just about to complete 1 year and we are still taking blood from volunteers. So we'll know the level of antibody, but we do know that vaccines have been able to really create a very high level of antibody in our volunteers and the people who have been vaccinated. So it's good news. They may go well over 1 year, but at the moment, if we were to give an answer to that, it will only be speculation. As regards to variants, the two vaccines we use here in the UK, Pfizer and AstraZeneca, have been amazingly good for the B117, which is the one first identified here in the UK. And this is actually very good news because that is the dominant variant we actually had. And that is the variant that Europe is now struggling with. But we know from the UK experience that the two vaccines we have used actually are good for the B117.
Okay, thank you so much. One common question, which I'm sure will be answered by Dr. Dietis and probably Dr. Paul Telfer, is in the clinical trials for the vaccines, have high-risk groups been included? Because we have read somewhere, and you know, it's not good to read and not being able to interpret appropriately. But so you are the ones to respond to this question more appropriately than me or any other. So risk groups, we mean people with comorbidities, with hematological problems, with transplant, immunosuppressed. We have heard, we have read that for the Pfizer vaccine, there were 42.8% inclusion of risk groups. Are these risk groups referring to older age or comorbidities as well? Because we know that most of the vaccine trials have not included comorbidities.
Yes, and this is one of the problems we had because generally in the original trials, the people at higher risk, immunosuppressed and so on, were actually excluded. But we are getting a lot more experience with them because we have been vaccinating them. And we find that we can actually use them with some precautions in particular cases. For example, if somebody is going to be going on immunotherapy, we vaccinate them before, but we can still vaccinate people who are immunosuppressed. But what we do explain to them is that the vaccine will not take as well as somebody else. So it is vital that you do continue with all the measures you take to avoid infection. The fact that you have been vaccinated, and that is actually for anybody, the fact that you have been vaccinated doesn't mean that you relax in any way, shape or form with the measures you take to avoid the virus.
It is very important to clarify, Dr. Kassianos, that we do not choose vaccinations, or there are no recommendations from medical disciplines that one vaccine is better than the other, because we have had this in Cyprus and in other countries that certain risk group or certain patients, chronic patients, have demanded a particular type of vaccine. Is there such a separation? We need to be clear.
In the UK, we have never suggested one vaccine over another. Okay. Only if you are sensitive, allergic, severe allergies to PEG, to the polyethylene glycol that is in the Pfizer vaccine, then we will give you the AstraZeneca vaccine.
Yes,
But not in any way, shape, or form to actually allow people to choose a vaccine. You have the vaccine we have here. Why? Because they are both very safe and effective as long as you are not severely sensitive to the excipients in the vaccine.
Thank you very much. So it's the excipients and the active ingredient that makes a difference, and not the kind of, and not the type of vaccine, because we've been asked by transplant patients, by diabetic patients. As I've said in my presentation, thalassemia patients have a number of comorbidities. So these questions came from these people. Thank you so much. This was very clear. There is a last question. I am diabetic, thalassemia major, and have thyroid, age 30 years. Is vaccine will be safe for me? It comes from across the world. If so, what test pre and post you suggest for precaution? We have said that, but we can answer to this patient. She's diabetic, she's 30 years, and she also has thyroid. So it's endocrine complications.
Thyroid disease and diabetes and your age does not exclude you from vaccination. Now, hematological conditions we're going to discuss. Paul Teffler has got a presentation there,
I'm sure.
and we'll see. But there is no reason why you should not be vaccinated.
Okay,
and
thank you
fact,
so much.
If you are vaccinated, you really get immunity, quite a lot of immunity against this virus, which can be so severe for you if you were to get it.
Exactly, exactly. This is what the recommendations say, that infection with SARS-CoV-2 on this all comorbidity is much more severe than any side effects of any of the vaccinations. So thank you so much. So we go to our next speaker, and then Dr. Kassianos, we probably have a number of other questions.
We're going on to hear a little bit more about vaccine research from now on. And the presenter is Dr. Nicholas Diedis, who is assistant professor in pharmacology at the University of Cyprus Medical School. He's head of the experimental pharmacology laboratory of the university. He has a special training and a special interest in as a medical educator. He's also, of course, involved in research and is a member of the editorial board of the UK Journal of Pharmaceutical Biosciences. So, Dr. Diedis, your turn.
Thank you very much. And I really appreciate the invitation. And I was asked today to talk about a little bit about research and development on the vaccines. And it was really difficult for me to put together slides talking about the research and development for vaccines because of the fact that currently all the information that are coming are very scarce regarding the clinical trials of vaccines that are under development, because of the fact that we are in such a special occasion, and all the focus is on finishing the clinical trials. It's very hard to find data before the actual announcements. But I have put together a few slides which I believe are important. Some of those are actually a repetition of some of the slides that Professor Gracianos has mentioned, but as an academic, I really believe that repetition is very important in learning and coming through important messages. So just a very short introduction about how vaccines are developed. And in most people, most people believe that a few months of development of a vaccine is not really something that will provide safety and efficacy for most population. But we have to remember that most of the vaccines that are produced now and developed, they have been developed in terms of prior research, basic research in terms of their components or in terms of the administration methods, etc. So research and development of vaccine is very similar to drug development. We have the first phase, which is really the discovery or inventory phases, looking about the exhibitions of the vaccines and how we put them together. And then we are introducing the vaccines through tests in cells and in laboratory animals in the non-clinical part of research. Of course, after that, all the data that are developed and formulated, they're used in order to formulate and design clinical trials. And the clinical trials have three basic phases. Phase 1 is just a few people. Phase 2 is more people. Phase 3 is thousands of people. And because of the fact that we're talking about vaccines, it's very important to differentiate from drugs. In drugs, the development focuses in people who have a disease that need to be, we need to provide therapeutics. But in vaccines, we're talking about healthy people. So the European Medicines Association and the FDA and all the other regulatory bodies are very, very strict in terms of vaccine safety because of the fact that you give vaccines to healthy people. And of course, the process is the same, but the whole safety decision-making and evaluation is very, very thorough, especially for vaccines, because of the fact that we give them to healthy people. And after all this evaluation and decision-making, we're moved to the scale-up production. This is an actual phase in research development because it really affects the outcome of the quality of the vaccine. And of course, we have safety studies, and this is an image that shows clearly that the safety monitoring starts very, very early through the research development phase and follows all the way through the end. And it actually doesn't stop as soon as the vaccine comes out to population. Safety monitoring and safety studies are always through the clinical and preclinical development, and actually in the manufacturing development as well of the vaccines. So all this process is a very thorough process, and all the scientists were very appreciative of the European Medicines Association that actually announced very, very early in the vaccine development stages that all the companies that are actually developing vaccines, that was back in last in summer, there were supposed to be specific milestones that they needed to achieve. So they placed all the framework beforehand, and they told companies that in order for your vaccine to be successful, we need 1, 2, 3, 4 things. And all these things included very, very important safety evaluation measurements and specific thresholds that have to be met. Now, in normal situations, a new vaccine requires a lot of money, nearly 3 billion euros for one vaccine. It takes roughly about 10 years for a normal situation for a vaccine to develop, and it requires about 7 to 10 years for the actual company to make profit for all the investments that they've placed for the vaccine development. But of course, this timeline and this kind of model wouldn't work in an emergency situation. And this is, of course, something that comes up very often. Professor Kassianos mentioned it very, very clearly, the ways and the reasons and the factors that affected our vaccines for COVID-19 to be produced so quickly. And I will roughly, very quickly mention them here, but I want you to really compare and see how we used to do things and how we are making things now, in order to show you that the actual safety is not really a concern due to the quickness of the process. Now, as I mentioned before, usually we need 3 billion for one vaccine. Well, all this money usually are invested by companies, right? In very early stages of the pandemic, the US administration has provided 9 billion euros directly to companies to start vaccine development as soon as possible. So the available resources were given very, very quickly at the beginning. The European Commission has also invested a lot of money in the manufacturing process. So they secured the manufacturing process wouldn't require a lot of money be invested by the company. So all the resources were available very, very early. The second step, as Dr. Kassianos very nicely explained, usually when we design studies, we take a step-by-step approach. But this step by step is we finish one study, we analyze, and then we continue to the next one. But this is really a design because of the fact that the resources have to be put by the same company. Now, when the resources are available, you can start multiple studies simultaneously overlapping one another. So when the phase 1 clinical study started for a COVID-19 vaccine, in the middle of the study, when we had some initial data, we started straight away phase 2, and then phase 3 was simultaneously developed. And if you remember very closely, some companies have started to develop, to produce their vaccines before phase 3 trials began in order to save time. So this was some kind of a gamble in terms of investment, but it really helped us to move along a very quick timeline. Another factor is the human resources. Now, the European Medicines Association is not an endless resource of people looking at all these thousands and thousands of pages of research data for each vaccine. So usually there is a specific committee. Now there is a specific task force resourced with many people and many different groups looking simultaneously data across the board from different studies. It's a process called rollout. So it's a rolling review. The EMA is actually reviewing the data of a developed vaccine before the actual vaccine finalizes its stages. So that also saves a lot of time. And of course, the other two factors which are very important, and for me are the most important of all, is the volunteers. Now, I'll give an example that I give to people asking me every time about why these vaccines have been developed so quickly, and I'm not really be able to trust them because of that. Now, at the moment, we have many trials, clinical trials for the Ebola vaccine. How many volunteers do you think will go from around the world to register in those studies for an Ebola vaccine? Very few. And it's very hard for these companies to attract volunteers. So because of the fact that the studies need volunteers to finalize, it takes many years to finish those studies because of the fact that we don't have volunteers. But of course, in the pandemic, we had many thousands of volunteers. Many older patients, older volunteers wanted to take part in order to be able to have access to the vaccine very early. And of course, many other thousands of people. And because of that, we were able to finalize very quickly the phase 3 studies, especially that they need thousands and thousands of volunteers. And the final factor, which I also believe is very important, is the fact that the virus is out there. Now, I gave the example of the Ebola vaccine. The Ebola vaccine requires Ebola virus to be outside in the community in order for our volunteers to be tested whether they will be infected or not. But the Ebola cases are about 20,000 worldwide. It's very rare to be infected by a virus. Therefore, the data that you will get from phase 3 will take a lot of time. Whereas in a pandemic, there is a virus all over the place. So whenever you finish your recruitment of your volunteers and you leave them outside, they are coming very quickly with specific milestones of infections, and therefore you have your data very quickly. So these are the main reasons why we came to the development of these vaccines very quickly. It has nothing to do with safety. It has nothing to do with the way that we treated the volunteers and the studies and the analysis that we did in this data. It's all because of the resources and the volunteers and the infections and the reduced cost and the study design that actually cut down so much this time of vaccine development. And it's very usual to have many years of vaccines. This is a very nice slide, which I like, which gives you a roughly estimate of how many years it takes for vaccines for different viruses to be developed. Now, in the beginning of the pandemic, when we had vaccines being under development, many people were wondering whether we will have them quickly enough, or if they come quickly, maybe we haven't studied them in terms of safety. But as a pharmacologist, as a basic scientist, the one thing that I was really afraid was this: the fact that we have many viruses that we have not yet been able to develop a vaccine, no matter how many years we tried. And I was really very scared and afraid whether COVID-19 and SARS-CoV-2 would be one of these viruses that we would try for years, not being able to find a vaccine. Fortunately, it was not the case. As you can see here, until today, the measles vaccine was the one that had the shortest development period, about 2-3 years. And of course, now COVID-19 vaccines have, because of all the strategies which I described earlier, they have been developed very quickly. And thankfully, they are effective and safe as well. And safety, of course, it's something that I would underline more and more because of the fact that we have safety monitoring as we speak now. And today, I think we have more than 550 million people have been vaccinated around the world. There is many monitoring safety boards around the world, in the European Union, national safety boards in the Americas, in Asia, in Australia. So all these regulatory bodies are looking at cases, are looking at people getting vaccinated. They're following up on those people, and every case is being monitored in order to make sure that there is the safety of the vaccines is something that is constantly monitored. Now, at this moment, in terms of development, we have 103 vaccines under clinical trials. At the moment, we have 23 vaccines which are in phase 3. Most of those will, not most of those, I think maybe 5 or 6 might be ready before the end of this year. And all of the next of the phase 3 vaccines hopefully will be ready in 2022. And this is a very important slide because I think it gives you the depth of the research and the development and the effort that is being undertaken by many different research institutes and nations around the world to develop more vaccines. And of course, all these trials of vaccines are happening all over the world. And this is an advantage. Usually when we develop a vaccine, a company might have a clinical trial in one country or in 2 countries, but now we have many countries taking part in clinical trials. This is very important, especially because we're talking about different populations. We're talking about genetically different genetically populations that are different in terms of targets, of molecular targets, etc. And we have also variants which are coming through from different nations. And it's very important, all these trials that are being tested in different countries, that they do have all these differences in terms of populations. And Dr. Kassianos has very nicely put a couple of examples of vaccine types. These are the types that have been developed at the moment. You are very aware of the RNA, mRNA vaccines. We have the traditional types of vaccines. The traditional types of vaccines are the ones that have live attenuated or inactivated virus. We don't have at the moment any vaccine, especially in the US and Europe, that has inactivated or live attenuated vaccines, viruses. Most of these vaccines at the moment are Chinese in origin or from India and some other places. But we have vaccines that have subunits. And these subunits, for example, are proteins, is the protein target of the virus. And we actually put this little protein inside the vaccine, so we don't need to use a whole virus. And we also have the viral vectors. Now, the viral vectors is not a virus. It's not a live COVID-19 virus. It's not SARS-CoV-2. The viral vector is a different virus. At the moment, we use viral vectors in the AstraZeneca and in the Johnson & Johnson vaccines. We actually use the vector, the virus of a typical adenovirus, which is a common cold virus. Now, we use this virus only the shell, the outside. That's why we call it a vector. And inside, we introduce the genetic code that we use in the other vaccines, like the DNA and the RNA vaccines. So we take advantage of the fact that the cold virus is attacking our body and it can be absorbed through our body in order to give all this information to our body. Now, There are very many differences in terms of vaccines and advantages and disadvantages in terms of types of vaccines. I don't want to go into very much details, but I will just very briefly say just the small differences between these types of vaccines. Now, the genetic vaccines, which is the mRNA or the DNA vaccines, it's very important for people to understand. They are not implicating the virus at any point inside our bodies. You cannot get COVID by getting vaccinated, right? You don't get the SARS-CoV-2 virus in your body when you have an mRNA vaccine. What you do is you receive the information how to create antibodies against a virus. So basically, we're giving the information to our bodies how to create the virus. And we have obviously, as you see here, the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccines are mRNA vaccines. And there are a couple of more mRNA vaccines coming. The Imperial College London is producing an mRNA vaccine. I think it's in phase 2, if I'm not mistaken. But we also have CureVac, which is a German company, and they are having the next mRNA vaccine, which hopefully will be ready before the end of summer. Now, the viral vectors, I talked about those. It's the AstraZeneca vaccine, it's the Janssen vaccine, but also it's the Russian vaccine as well, the Gamaleya developed vaccine. And these are vaccines, as I said, that they use the common cold virus to introduce inside genetic information to our bodies, how to produce antibodies. Now, the protein vaccines, these I think are the most exciting vaccines in terms of development, in terms of scientific research. The Novavax vaccine and the Sanofi vaccine, these are two vaccines which the European Union has made orders already. The Novavax vaccine I believe it's ready to announce their results, the final results, and they will be asking for an approval in the UK, in Europe, and in the United States very soon. And I believe it will be ready before summer to the general population. The Sanofi vaccine had some issues in phase 2. Now it's back on track. It's in phase 3, and it also has been co-developed with JSK as well. And this is actually what Professor Kassianos said as well. The virus outside has the corona. Yes, it's a protein which looks like a crown. And if we take this protein and we put it in a vaccine and we give it to ourselves, we don't get COVID, but our body takes the information of which is the enemy, and therefore it develops antibodies against this protein, and therefore we have antibodies against a virus. And of course, the other two types of viruses are, as you can see, is viruses from countries like China or India, etc. And also some European companies are developing these vaccines. These are the traditional types of vaccines. In the traditional sense of vaccinology, what we do is we take the virus that makes us ill and we change it, we make it harmless, right? And we put it inside our bodies, and therefore we develop antibodies. Now, these kind of platforms have advantages and disadvantages. Some of the disadvantages is the fact that people that have immunocompromised situations or people that have low immune responses, they may be a disadvantage for those people for these types of vaccines. But at the moment, we don't have in Europe or in the US these types of vaccines produced. Now, no matter what the advantages and disadvantages of each type of vaccine, if you start reading in the internet or you're reading on the newspapers or which vaccine is doing what and which is the best, the most appropriate information and most accurate information is the clinical trials, apart from the real life, of course. And I want to remind people that for the Pfizer vaccine, we have real world data from Israel already showing what we know about efficacy and safety. So we don't have to be afraid of these vaccines. We actually have given them in millions of people, and we have done very good analysis on these vaccines. And of course, in the US and in the UK, we have given the AstraZeneca vaccine and the Moderna vaccine. So we know that they are effective, and we know that they are safe vaccines. Now, there are, as I said before, there's many vaccines coming out. All are in different phases, depending on which type of vaccine. And I will finish with a couple of more slides. The usual question which I get is, why do we need to develop 103 new vaccines coming out in phase 3 and phase 2 and phase 1 clinical trials? Why do we need so many vaccines? And the answer is this: 3 months after the beginning of vaccinations, we have very low percentage of people getting worldwide vaccinated with 1 dose. And if we look at fully vaccinations, the percentage is very low. So if you make an analogy, if this is the percentage of coverage that we have in 3 months, when are we going to get to 60 and 70% of coverage? We need desperately more vaccines. We need more doses in order to be very, very much cover a broad spectrum of people. And I want also to remind people that unless the virus gets away from our homes all over the world, we won't be fully safe, right? It's not about vaccinating all the Americans or all the Europeans and then we're safe. You know, people are communicating, people are traveling. If Asia and Africa are very, very back in track in vaccinations, this will come back to us in problems. And therefore, we desperately need more vaccines to develop. And I will finalize with this slide, which is the future. What are we going to expect? What's the next plans? Well, today we had an announcement, just today, that Pfizer has announced that the study that they did in 2,260 children between the ages of 12 and 15 gave an efficacy of 100% in terms of averting disease. That's an amazing efficacy. The safety also is very high. We need more data. As I said, this is an announcement made today. Moderna and all the other companies are making studies for children. I want to remind people that vaccinated children is very important for the pandemic. The children is a very big percentage of our population, and they play a very, very major role in passing through the virus. Of course, the variants and how to address these variants is very important, and this is what companies are doing at the moment. And of course, we are making studies for specific population. There is a few studies made in pregnant women at the moment. Again, we don't have data, we're waiting for that. And there's specific studies in patient groups. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Riadis. You have really given us the hope of more vaccinations, more doses coming up. It is true that the coverage of the vaccination programs is very important because it's not a matter of a percentage of each country being vaccinated. The two questions that I would pose for Dr. Riadis is the long-term effects, because we know safety, efficacy. You've been now we've got real data coming up, and collected as real data from Israel, from the UK, and from other countries that and USA that have more coverage. But long-term effect is a very important concern of our patients in terms of fertility, particularly the young ones. Because we know now what is happening. We know perhaps 8 months after vaccination, but do we have any indication, or should we have any concerns about long-term?
That's a very good question. It's a very usual question, which me as a pharmacologist, I usually receive. Now, this is unfortunately misinformation that has been around very, very early through the pandemic. There is no such a thing as a long-term effect of any vaccine. Right? Yeah. Now, okay. No, I'm not talking about there is no effect. I'm talking there is no such thing as long-term effect from something that you get administered once, right? Now, we categorize side effects based on their events, on the how rare or how very often they come about. So that's the way we categorize the events and the side effects. So a very, very rare side effect will be shown when you've vaccinated many, many people, right? A very a side effect that is coming very often will come to you in the clinical trials because you vaccinated thousands of people. So something that is coming is very usual. You'll see it in the clinical trials. But if you take, for example, the same happens with drugs. If you take one pill from one drug, there is no way you can calculate what's the long-term effects after 2 years of that one pill that you took once. Because of the fact that you live your life, you have many things affecting your daily life, and there is no way you can ever know if something happens to you, whether that one thing that you took has some effect. The only thing that you can know is whether there is a rare side effect. And by knowing the rare side effect, you need to give the vaccine or the drug to many people. Now, what we call a rare side effect is something above 100,000 people. So if 100,000 people take the same thing and only one person gets something, and we know that comes, for example, let's say that we know that it's because of the vaccine or the drug, then this is a very rare side effect. Now, I want to remind people that we have 550 million vaccinations at this point, right? So even the rare side effects that we get and we see are really a repetition of the things that we have seen already when we completed 1 million vaccinations or 2 million vaccinations. All the agencies and all the people that I talk to that are looking at vaccine safety, they say the same thing. At this point, there is nothing so much rare that we won't be able to identify. So at this moment, as we stand today, with the vaccines that we have today, all the vaccines are safe, even in something that is called long-term, which is actually not the case.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Dialis, just to make it clear to everybody, one of the reason why there's a misunderstanding about long-term effects is that the words mRNA and DNA are used, and people imagine that this is going to enter their own genome.
Yeah.
And this is why they think, oh, in the long term, I might get some.
That's very good. That's very good. Thank you very much for pointing this out. But I want to remind people that we are working with mRNA as a potential therapeutic since 1990. It's 30 years. 30 years we're studying what the mRNA is doing to the body when it gets inside, right? And we actually developed mRNA vaccines for cancer many years ago. Of course, many of them are still in trials. Many of them haven't really worked for cancer, but we know the safety of these vaccines and we know how they work. So the mRNA vaccine is not something that popped out in our heads in the beginning of the pandemic and we just started doing it in people. We have been based all our data in previous research and in previous methodologies and in previous data. So when, this is how science works. If something comes into the clinical trials today, it means it has been worked at least at the basic level for many years, right? So we have many data.
Thank you very much. These are very clear answers. Last question for the moment from Dr. Sodiroula Christou.
Dr. Dialis, I would like to ask if the side effects which we saw in the of using of AstraZeneca vaccine, which are more than in Pfizer, yes, is related to the viral vector. Maybe this virus which we use in order to
Adenovirus.
Yes, maybe is this fever, all these side effects are related to this vector, to this virus.
That's a good question. Now, we know how these vectors work because we have used these same vectors in other vaccines, right? So we know about these vectors. The adenovirus vectors are known. We have actually used them in an Ebola vaccine already. Also, the vector itself, the difference with vaccines that don't have the vector is the fact that when you are making an antibody response, you're creating antibodies. Some of your antibodies might go to the vector, right? They don't go to the actual genetic information for SARS-CoV-2. So it's not an issue of safety. Maybe it's an issue of efficacy. So the vaccines that have the vector, some of the antibodies that you produce are going towards the vector, they're not going towards the SARS-CoV-2. This is the only kind of issue, if you allow the expression, that I could use. But in terms of safety, no, there isn't, because I would also like you to remind you that the Gamaleya Russian vaccine is using the adenovirus. Johnson & Johnson is using the adenovirus. They have vaccinated thousands of people in their clinical trials. So if something is because of the vector, we should have seen it in all vaccines.
In the others, yeah. Thank you so much. There are many questions, but we will leave them for Dr. Paul Telford because there are many thalassemia related, and we are keeping a lot for you, Dr. Paul. Dr. Telford?
Okay. The next speaker is going to go straight to the hematological problems, to the hematological disorders, I should say, the hemoglobin disorders, and the effect of vaccines there is Dr. Paul Telford. Now, we hear... sorry. Okay, so we here have known and have collaborated with Paul for many decades, and we may assume that everybody else knows him, but just in case some people don't, I better actually do some reading for you. Dr. Paul Telfer is a clinical head of the hemoglobinopathy services in the Barts Health NHS Trust in East London hospitals, and he's a committee member of the National Specialist Commissioning in Hemoglobinopathies and the National Sickle Cell Thalassemia Screening Programs of the United Kingdom. So I'm not going to say much more. He's well known in the hemoglobinopathy field. He has done a lot of work both in thalassemia and in sickle cell, and so his subject, which is hemoglobin disorders and vaccines, should be, we know him to be an expert.
Thank you, Dr. Kuhn.
Thank you very much, Michael, Andrula, the TIF team, and thank you for the other speakers for their excellent presentations that have really set the scene very well. I'm not sure, are my slides up on the screen? Because
No. Please try to share from your...
Try to share it.
Oh, share. Okay, sorry about that. I wasn't sure whether I was supposed to. Let me just get my slides up. See if I can share. So I think. Just have a slight technical problem here. 1 second. Okay, I think this is that coming up now?
Yes, yes, excellent.
Oh, good. So apologies for that technical problem. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the experience of COVID-19 infection in hemoglobinopathy patients, so sickle cell and thalassemia, very much from an English perspective, although I hope that this will be relevant internationally as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the UK COVID vaccination experience. You've heard quite a lot about that already from George. And then something about the experience in vaccination in our patient group. For this slide, I'd like to thank the team at Imperial College, the hemoglobinopathy team, and of colleagues who have basically acted as a data center for the various coordinating centers around England for sickle cell and thalassemia. We have a network of centers. And right at the beginning of the pandemic, we got together and decided that we needed to collect data on cases, the severity of cases, and the risk factors for having a severe outcome in our patient group. And we are talking about sickle cell, thalassemia, and certain rare anemias. And this slide shows data up to the end of February on the number of cases identified. So these are cases according to the WHO criteria, which would be either with a positive RNA test or suspected but test not available. And this illustrates an epidemiology rather similar to the UK population as a whole, with two rather discrete waves of infection. And as you know, in England and in the UK, the coronavirus epidemic was really pretty severe. The hospitals were generally overwhelmed. In the first wave, there was an upshot in numbers in February, March of 2020. Numbers then tailed off because of the lockdown. And then the lockdown was partially lifted, and around Christmas time, there was another enormous wave of cases. And this was partly related also to the emergence of a variant, the so-called Kent variant, which seems to be more transmissible. And you can see that the numbers again increased substantially during the December-January period. And so that by the end of mid-February, there are about 630 cases in our population. And to put that in context, there are about 15,000 people living with sickle cell, about just over 1,000 living with thalassemia, and a small number with rare anemias. And the geographical distribution was really reflecting the distribution of patients, the large majority, over 70% in London. So we saw the majority of infected patients with sickle and thalassemia in the various parts of London, but there were also pockets in the north, in Manchester, Birmingham, Leicester, etc. And this is showing, I'm sorry about the slides, you may not be able to read all of that, but this is the diagnoses of those infected. And the red bars are the second wave, and the grey bars, excuse me, the first wave. It really this shows that the majority of infected were sickle cell, which reflects the number of people living with sickle cell in England, and slightly more in the second wave than in the first wave. You can also see that the thalassemia group was more affected in the second wave. We saw 49 patients with confirmed COVID with transfusion-dependent thalassemia, and a small number with non-transfusion-dependent thalassemia as well. So we did see a lot of people becoming infected, and got a lot of insight into the severity, how best to treat this. And I'm not going to talk particularly about that side of things today, but I will just, the headline information really was the mortality, which was tragically significant, although not particularly high, but nevertheless was shocking. So we had 15 deaths in the first wave, and so far 7 deaths in the second wave. The majority in sickle cell, but 1 or 2 with thalassemia. And we looked at this in a study which was published in Haematologica to try to identify risk factors for mortality. And this was just the sickle cell population in those who had a positive COVID RNA test. And what we found, which is slightly different to some of the other international studies, was that sickle cell did appear to put you at increased risk of mortality from COVID-19. So the odds ratio of dying even in the 18 to 49-year-olds was significantly increased compared to the background population. And this was compared with another study of the population that had been published. The majority of deaths were in the 50 to 79-year-old age range, but there were some, as you can see, in the 18 to 49. But I would point out that in the pediatric age range, the disease was very mild. So COVID-19 in pediatric sickle cell and thalassemia doesn't seem to cause a great deal of problem. And as a result of this study, really, we continue to regard sickle patients or adult sickle patients as extremely clinically vulnerable. So they should be shielding, and they would have early access to the vaccine. So what about the vaccination situation? You've heard a lot about this already. Just to say that in the UK, we're using 2 vaccines at the moment, the Pfizer-BioNTech, which was started on the 8th of December, and the Oxford University AstraZeneca on the 4th of January. And the policy in the UK was to give a second dose after 12 weeks or 3 months, not the licensed interval, but this was a decision based on the concern about the spread of the epidemic and the need to get as many people vaccinated as possible, and the early data showing the protective efficacy of a single dose. So we're now at a stage where, sorry, just before I go on to that, this, again, you've heard from the other speakers, but we have a sequence for vaccination. So the first to become vaccinated were the healthcare workers, those living in care homes, frontline social workers and care workers, followed by those over the age of 80. And then soon after that, those who were in the NHS shielded patient list, which included adults with sickle cell, but not thalassemia. And then further down the list, adults aged under 65 and those with long-term conditions. And although that clinical list there doesn't include thalassemia, in the real world, for those who were with thalassemia who are struggling to get vaccinated, their physician usually advocated for them to ensure that they got vaccinated within that wave. So this is the situation at present in the population as a whole. I'm not talking about sickle and thalassemia. So we're up to about 60% of those aged over 18 who have received a first dose. And the second doses obviously have been delayed, but it's now 7% of those aged over 18, and the numbers are increasing. And there is considerable evidence, as you've heard, for the vaccine effectiveness in the general population. And I won't go through this in detail because you've already heard that. But when you combine the data from the AstraZeneca and the Pfizer, and most of this data is just from a single first dose, there is a protective efficacy in terms of protection against getting infected, having a positive COVID RNA swab, of ending up in hospital, and of dying. And that is a significant protective effect. One study I would highlight is the so-called SIREN study, which looked at healthcare workers who got serially tested every week, I think, and have continued to do that. And this study, which was started during the early stages of the pandemic, was a good way of assessing the efficacy of the vaccine in healthcare workers. So those who hadn't got infected prior to vaccination, when you look at their hazard ratio of getting a positive swab, you can see that there was a significant protection in getting COVID infection at all, which became apparent by about day 14 and has been sustained. And this was just with a single dose. So what have we advised our patients? We've tried to contact our patients at every opportunity during their outpatient, which are largely telephone consultations at the moment, during their hospital visits, through patient user groups, etc., etc. And we've tried to have a uniform message across the country in the Haemoglobin disorder treatment community, as well as the advocacy groups, the Sickle Cell Society, the Thalassemia Society, etc., to recommend vaccination strongly. we've published this kind of information sheet, and there are also videos that have been posted on the websites, for instance, the Thalassemia Society and the Sickle Cell Society web page, with advice from experts, but also first-hand experiences from patients about getting the vaccination done. What we found is that this is perhaps not just restricted to the patient group, but a feature of the Black and Asian ethnic minority group in the United Kingdom, that there is some reluctance to be vaccinated. And there are, it's for various reasons, which I won't go into, but maybe we can discuss. There are certain beliefs about vaccination in general, about the COVID vaccination, and about being treated with something untested that have, I think, predominantly been a concern within the ethnic communities that are affected by these conditions. And what my experience, and I think my other colleagues around the country's experience, is that we have had to explain and encourage our patients to become vaccinated. And generally speaking, I think that having this information from a trusted specialist who is involved in their care over a long period of time has been very helpful. And I would say that at least 50% of our patients have been vaccinated at present, although there are still some who are not wishing to get vaccinated. What we've found from those vaccinated is that we're not aware of unexpected adverse effects of vaccination in our patient group, and that the adverse effect profile of temperatures, feeling a bit unwell for a day or so, an uncomfortable arm, are just the same as in the general population. I think we can also say, although this is very anecdotal, that being vaccinated in our patient group has contributed to the reduction in the number of infected patients. So the message really is that the UK is probably ahead of the rest of the world in vaccinating people with thalassemia and sickle cell because of the rapid rollout of the vaccination in general, and that although there's been some reluctance, people are more and more going forward to be vaccinated now, and the side effects of the vaccination so far have been no different from the general population. We haven't seen severe outcomes, and we are at the moment seeing a great reduction in the number of people with sickle cell and thalassemia infected. That might be partly a result of the lockdown, but also I'm certain a result of the vaccination. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for my colleagues I'm speaking on behalf of, and I'd be very happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Paul. I think we have a lot of questions, but just one question from me. When you're referring to that you have vaccinated 50% of the hemoglobinopathy patients, are you referring to one dose of vaccination to these patients as well?
So far, yes. And I should say that that's very that's a personal estimate. We don't have very good figures on that at the moment. And of course, none of the children have been vaccinated because at the moment the vaccine is not licensed.
So the percentage vaccinated with one dose, well, it's a good analysis of the protection that one dose has offered. But okay, we will just ask some of the questions that are very thalassemia related, but we'll also leave some to Dr. Forney as a hemoglobinopathy expert as well. Of course, I need to mention that some other hemoglobinopathy patient populations have been vaccinated, perhaps a little bit ahead of the UK, like the Cyprus one that we will hear, the United Arab Emirates, and some other patient groups across. And so we will have real data soon collected. So, Dr. Telfer, what side effects have been observed in thalassemia patients who have been vaccinated? You've already said that they are at the same level as with the rest of the community. So, in your practice and in your experience, there were not some rare or thalassemia-related side effects of the vaccination? No. Okay, no. That answers that question. Then, αφήνε το έναν το μπορώ, έτσι παρακαλώ, για να μπορώ να διαβάζω. Now, a thalassemia major having abnormal heart condition like PQRST, Q-wave disturbance, with clotting problem, please suggest what to do. Probably is related to the, clotting sort of incidences of. So, what we should do? What do you suggest?
Yeah, so I think that there is this is a kind of an ongoing discussion at the moment, and I think that it may not be possible to give a entirely satisfactory answer. I think my advice is that such a patient should be vaccinated, and I think that decision should be done in consultation with your specialist, with your thalassemia specialist, because there will be individual issues for the individual patient. But I think there are very few reasons, as we've heard from Dr. George and Nicholas as well, that very few reasons for not being vaccinated. There will be this issue about whether, like in Germany, they've again withdrawn vaccination with the AstraZeneca from those aged under 60. I think that announcement was made yesterday because of the rare instance of blood clots. Whether that is going to be something, a consideration in our patient group. The thing is that I think I am not able to advise a specific vaccine over another one at this stage, and but I think there may be an argument in a thalassemia patient who's had a history of blood clots, who's had a splenectomy, for instance, for having the Pfizer rather than the AstraZeneca.
Yes. I think this has been the case in some of the countries. I'm sure Dr. Thorney will tell us what happened to Italy, but this is a very good point, and perhaps not to wait too long. Perhaps we should put some information together and guide our patients across the world. Last is most low and medium income countries will most probably be able to administer only one dose for a while, as we have seen also on the map. Is this enough to protect high-risk groups such as thalassemia and sickle cell disease patients?
Well, no, I think the results show that you get good, you get very good protection with one dose, but we don't know whether that's sufficiently durable, and it's against the product license. So I think the advice should be to have 2 doses, but I think that in the UK things were stretched a bit with going, and that was a risk taken based on an assessment of the status of the epidemic. I mean, George, I think, might be able to say more about that, but I think that what it tells us is that a single dose certainly provides protection over the number of months that we've been able to follow so far.
Yes, of course. And the other question that concerns a lot of patients is the inhibition of transmission, the prevention of transmission, because we have heard a lot about reinfection, about infection after vaccination, and there is a study saying the percentage that of protection of vaccinated people over 65 and the protection of vaccinated people less than 65 years, which is more in the older group, and more protection in the young groups, even after vaccination. So reinfection is the question. Transmission.
I would like to defer to.
Sorry, not reinfection. Transmission of the virus. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I think George might be a better authority to answer that than me. I mean, I'm speaking from a hematological point of view. Yeah.
Dr. Kassianos, what about transmission after vaccination, please? Very important concern.
The AstraZeneca in the original study did studies for transmission. They found a reduction of about 60%. Pfizer have done another study later on, and they found reduction of transmission about 70%. Neither vaccine gives 100%, so we ought to assume that there is transmission, and therefore taking every step to prevent infection with the vaccine are the two things we need to do.
I think even here in Cyprus, we have evidence transmission in a healthcare professional announced yesterday and today that had been vaccinated.
May I contribute just very, very shortly? So we have also data from Israel that they show 90% efficacy for infection in general. So they showed that the Pfizer vaccine prevents infection and also prevents asymptomatic disease, of course, as well as symptomatic in similar percentages. Of course, it depends on the age as well. There is a certain stratification, etc. But the other thing that I wanted to point out is the fact that it's very difficult for studies to be able to determine transmissibility. You can determine whether you are infected and you are asymptomatic, yes, but it's very difficult to be able to determine whether you, as an infected person, you are able also to transmit, because you have to really prove that it was you and no one else. So it's very difficult to have accurate data from studies about actual transmission. We know from real data from the UK, US, and Israel that we have some kind of protection from infection, and we assume that if you are infected, you are able to transmit some, maybe at a lower percentage if you have antibodies, but nevertheless, that's a very, very basic reason to still be protected, not only not to be able to transmit, but also to protect people around you that are not being able to be vaccinated.
Yeah. Some real data from Israel, as you very well said, showed 50% only protection over 65 years of age, those who were vaccinated, and much more protection against infection of vaccinated people in younger generations. But this only shows that preventative measures need to be followed even after vaccination. Now, we will continue with we move with the speaker. Thank you so much, Dr. Telfer.
Okay, my turn. Okay. Basically, one of the hardest hit areas of COVID is North Italy. And certainly North Italy has also quite a large sickle cell and thalassemia population. So we have with us Professor Gianluca Forni, who is a hematologist at the Department of General Medicine at the Galliera Hospital in Genova. He's been responsible for the Thalassemia and Congenital Anemia Center since 1997 in Genova. He's also a member of the Grand Review Committee for the registering of experts, as far as I can see, and evaluation of scientific research in Italy. He is also president since 2014 of the Italian Society of Haemoglobinopathies. So here we have an expert hematologist, an expert in hemoglobinopathies, who is expected to have a very wide experience also of COVID in our patients. Dr. Gianluca.
Thank you, TIF, for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be here now. The experience of Italy is focused more in survey regarding the infection than of vaccination. The vaccination, as can you say later, started only in this month. We started, as you know, in Italy, the first wave arrived in February of 2020. And we, as Italian Society of Thalassemia and Hemoglobinopathy, started in the first days of March of 2020 with a survey regarding the cases of infection of patients infected. And this survey is possible to see the results, the case recorded now in the site of a scientific society, is an open access record. The results of first observation was published in April of 2020. In that case, the cases recorded were about 20 cases, and these are the center that recorded the cases, about 28 hemoglobinopathy center, and the distribution of the cases in first wave was prevalent in North Italy, and now at 30th of March are the update of the survey are recorded 343 patients, prevalent 222 are thalassemia, transfusion-dependent thalassemia, and the other are sickle and non-transfusion dependent thalassemia. We recorded also other rare anemias. The outcome of the cases, the high prevalence of the patients were recovered, and we now we have 7 patients died, and the patients was 4 patients with transfusion-dependent thalassemia, 1 non-transfusion-dependent thalassemia, and 2 with sickle cell disease. The age of the patient that died was between 40 and 60 years old, the patients. The general treatment of these of the cases was 1 year ago, as you remember, was used hydroxychloroquine, but now the standard therapy are steroids, antibiotics, and heparin in this type of patients, like other population, other patients. As you know, as is possible to see, the hospitalization was in high intensity, was only for 15 patients, low medium in 52 patients. About 271 patients no need the hospitalization. This is the curve of the wave. It's possible in the first one to see that 1 year ago, after the first wave, we have the cases in black are cases with thalassemia, and gray is the general population, and the distribution of the cases was similar, with a peak in October of 2020, and now we are after a decrease, dramatic decrease after the first lockdown during the summer, and now the cases are decreasing, but and the deaths was in this period, not in the first wave. Comparing the number of patients followed, these are the number of patients followed in these 28 centers that reported cases, and the number of will compare it to general population. The number of prevalence is similar, but we think that our population is, there is a bias because population of hemoglobinopathy followed near center are more cared, so in general population the number is underestimated. In March of this year, in 10 of March, 11 of March, the Prime Minister recommended the vaccination, the group for target group for the vaccination, and in priority high fragility patients included also hemoglobinopathies, patients affected by thalassemia and sickle cell disease. This group of patients arrive after 80 years old patients, and the vaccination are started in this month. So I have no data regarding the effect of vaccination. We start the vaccination also near our center, and we help the patients also to explain to the patients the advantage of the vaccination, also to reduce the hesitation if there is some hesitation. The minister is recommended for hemoglobinopathies the use of Pfizer vaccination, but I think that this recommendation was Pfizer or Moderna mRNA vaccination. But I think that this indication was due to the fact that when at that time the information regarding other vaccines were not complete. In a recent survey of Italian Society of Hemoglobinopathies, we registered about 10,000 of patients with hemoglobinopathies, distribute about 5,000 of transfusion-dependent thalassemia, about 2,000 of non-transfusion-dependent thalassemia, about 2,000 of sickle cell disease. I think, and we hope for the next 2 months to finish, to complete the vaccination program. As you know, in Italy, the health system is regional, so in this moment is not homogeneous start the program of vaccination, but we are confident that in the next 2-3 months we complete the program of vaccination of patients with hemoglobinopathies. So I have no data regarding the effect because we started only 2 weeks ago. I have no other information for this. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Forni. So you have just started the vaccinations. We'll be very interested to see how you go ahead. You are vaccinating with all 3 vaccines, as I know, yes? Or have you decided?
No,
yeah.
No, the recommendation of health in the health program is to vaccinate patients with hemoglobinopathies by mRNA vaccine, like Pfizer or Moderna.
Yes, that is what I wanted to hear, because we heard this from our patient experts, but we didn't want to disclose.
But I think that the decision was due to the fact that when this decision was keep the information regarding other vaccine was not complete. Now I think that all type of vaccine is good for these patients.
Okay.
For our,
Lovely.
my opinion, but
so the last message is that all vaccines will be fine and will be protecting these patients.
Yes.
Any questions that just a couple of questions. So there's always the question, any comments on thrombosis linked to AstraZeneca, but I think we've covered that in a number of ways.
Actually, the two next speakers who are clinicians in charge of thalassemia centers in United Arab Emirates and in Cyprus may be able to give us their experience, because at least for Cyprus, I know that most of the patients, if not all, have been vaccinated with AstraZeneca.
So Dr. Mike, it's a very good recommendation and suggestion. With the permission and consensus of Dr. Forni, we'll go to our next speaker, our next two speakers who are also hemoglobinopathy experts, and then we'll accumulate the questions, and perhaps Dr. Kassianos and Dr. Viedis can join in the interaction together with our hemoglobinopathy experts.
Okay.
So the next one.
We will start with the Emirates Thalassemia Center. The presenter is Dr. Ahmed Farag Soliman, who is a specialist in internal medicine. He has worked in hematology as well. He's been in charge of the Thalassemia Center at the Latifa Hospital in Dubai, which is one of the largest thalassemia centers actually, and best organized in many, compared to any part of the world. He's been in charge since 2013. So, Dr. Ahmed, it's up to you. Tell us your experience.
Thank you, Dr. Mar. Thank you, Dr. Androla. Thank you for TIF team for this kind invitation. I'm happy to be there with you. For next time, I think within 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let me share my presentation. It's clear now, my presentation?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Okay, so thank you for my colleagues for this excellent presentation. It's fruitful and very professional talks. We have our experience, but first of all, let me express my sorrow for losing one of our leaders in charity, and Sheikh Hamdan bin Rashid, who we lost him last week. He is the one even opening our center in 1995. Thalassemia Center in Dubai, it was inaugurated in 1989, and it was opened in 1995. It is a non-profit organization. We are serving beta thalassemia patient, UAE citizen, and Dubai residents. You know all about fact of thalassemia. This is just introduction to who don't know. Thalassemia is a genetic disease and the blood transfusion dependent in most cases, and they have a lot of comorbidities. Until now, the only curative is bone marrow transplantations. This is a timeline of thalassemia over 95 years now, from Dr. Cooley's till trials of genetic therapy. And we hit by pandemic in 2020. I have two phases: 2020 pre-vaccine and 2021 after vaccine. In 2020, was first wave here in UAE, we have many challenges. Most of them was, of course, healthcare system, and also in logistics, socially and economic, and regional and international challenges. The most important healthcare challenges was how we would deliver this our service in a safe way for patient and safe way also for staff to avoid infection and transmission of the COVID. We create an isolation room and a quarantine room during triaging of our patient, and we offered a fast track screening system for them. Any suspected case, we collect PCR test on the spot, and the result will come within 8 to 12 hours. If his result is negative, we can transfuse him next day. If it is positive, we will advise him either home isolation or organizational isolation or hospital admission according to his symptoms or according to his case. Also, we handling a shortage of staff because many of our staff either they went for as a frontliners for testing or for COVID isolation units, or some of our staff was positive and they quarantined for 14 days. About logistics, as we all we faced a severe shortage in blood units, especially in wave 1 and wave 2. But here, blood bank really did a very good job, and they almost they covered us with many units. But at least we shortened, we lessened our target to 12 instead of 13 as pre-hemoglobin transfusion rate only during these waves. Curfew was affect many patients during transportation, especially between Emirates, especially between Abu Dhabi and UAE. But we give them some permission, and it was authorized by the DHA to pass the borders. Holded all elective medical service, radiology, MRI, to start postponed, surgical like splenectomy or cholecystectomy, all surgical non-emergency surgical maneuvers postponed. But once we can restart, we reschedule all patients, and all of them we did. We don't have any delayed patient now, alhamdulillah. Also, we supported the Latifa Hospital during wave 1 and wave 2 by staff and by equipment. Social challenges like long time quarantine or isolation, it give our patient depression mode or many suicidal even thoughts. And we did the group gathering even online. We supportive group meeting. We hold it physical, but we continue on as a webinars and as online meetings, and we with them all the time with social media, either by WhatsApp groups, by on Instagram, by sharing every minute. We keep in touch with our patient in close to solve any problem on the spot. Pre-counseling clinic had a lot of visits during COVID situation, because marriage rate rates were high during the wave 1 and wave 2. I think that due to low cost of marriage, so it's a good time to finish all the commitments. About economic challenge, as you know, pandemic has a bad impact on world economy, and it's affecting charity, foundation funds, and downsizing many companies, and hit many of our patients, unfortunately. Regional and international challenges. Center, unfortunately, we stopped to serve Omani patients due to lockdown and closed borders for many times. But now they are taking care in centers in Oman, and they did a good job there, and still we are in contact with our patient. No more outsourced services like bone marrow. We couldn't let our patient to travel to finish their bone marrow transplantation, or even to follow up with centers abroad. But once it will be safe to travel, of course we will send them. Here, this pandemic waves, we have two waves, one in 2020, and this last wave, second wave, during from Jan to March, only 3 months. As you see here, it was in daycare patient to beta thalassemia major patient, we infected 27 patients, and in outpatient, this include BTI, sickle cell disease, and post bone marrow transplantation, only 11. This is in first wave. And thanks to God, we don't have any losses. But in second wave, last 3 months, despite there is a number is less, it's only 17 and 7 cases only in outpatients, but we lost 2 patients. These 2 patients, one of them was sickle cell disease with autoimmune hemolytic anemia, and the other one, it was BTI with pulmonary hypertension. And they passed away within 2 weeks of 2 to 4 weeks after COVID infection. Post-vaccination in 2021, the vaccine, the national campaign here started in January 2021, and since day one we are taking care of our patient and boosting for the vaccine importance and safety awareness, because this is the most common question from our patient. Can I take it? It is safe. It is how long it will be covered, and also we discussed with our colleagues in campaign units and in all over the guidelines, national guidelines, to integrate our thalassemia patient as a priority patients to take vaccine. It's not easy job because it's centers all over the 7 Emirates, and it is under MOH, not under DHA. So we contacted them, and we are giving each patient a letter for him about his details, about the situation, it is safe for him or not, and we recommend he will take vaccine or not. Most of them went to nearby center in his Emirates, in 7 Emirates, and here the national campaign try to cover most population in shortest time. But to collect the data about who vaccinated, who not, this all data in special application under MOH, not under our access. That's why there is difficult to collect the data, and we are waiting till patient he will come to during his visit, and we will assess, or he will contact with us. Once he get vaccination, he will send his card through WhatsApp to our department. And till now, for beta thalassemia major patient more than 16 years, they are vaccinated 43% to 118 patients, and 159 is waiting. And I think we will try to get 70%. This is our target within 1 or 2 months, inshallah. Most of this patient was taking Sinopharm vaccine, and it was 82%, and Pfizer we giving to 60%, and only 2%. It's only 2 cases AstraZeneca. With Sinopharm vaccines, this is Chinese one. We don't have any special side effect for our thalassemia population other than the normal population, and even for Pfizer also we didn't notice any special side effect. If it is most common side effect we notice, maybe fever, body pain, especially after second dose, and we are giving 2 doses 21 days apart. Other than this, we didn't notice any special effect for our thalassemia or sickle cell patient. But most of our patients they receive Sinopharm vaccine. And these are the numbers. The beta thalassemia major patient more than 16, and they extend the age only since 2 weeks. Before 2 weeks, they are vaccinating more than 18 years. So we are now the spectrum between 16 to 18 just included since 2 weeks, And most of them, as I mentioned, was taking Sinopharm and Pfizer BioNTech second vaccine, and AstraZeneca, only 2 cases received AstraZeneca. This is a picture of our staff. Of course, this is a picture before COVID, and I hope we can take another one soon. Thanks for your time, and your question more than welcome. Thank you.
So you've vaccinated about 43% of your patients with the novel vaccine. And of course, you are collecting, I suppose, data on their behavior and on any side effects as they come back. Because as I understand, you give them a certificate, and then when they come back, there is a conversation with the treating physician on the vaccine outcome, yes? Yeah.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And we are now preparing a questionnaire, and we will this survey or questionnaire we will spread among this who vaccinated to answer it, and we will collect the data from them, and we will analyze it. And soon we will give a full article and study about the vaccination and about the comorbidities during the vaccine.
Actually, a lot of our population, our patient population, is vaccinated with novel vaccine, and we are waiting to gather data as well. Do you think your Pfizer and your AstraZeneca supplies will increase, or you'll still be vaccinating at the same proportions between the vaccines?
I think it will be the same, but last 2 weeks or last month, I think there's more Pfizer to come. But but Sinopharm is still there, and they are planning to make a new factory for them here in UAE. So I think Sinopharm it will be here till a long time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Our last speaker for today.
So our last speaker for today is Dr. Sotiroula Christou. She's an internist who's been in charge now for the Nicosia Thalassemia Center for a very long time. I can't remember, at least how many?
30.
But she's still young anyway.
Something like 30 years. She's still young, as Abdullah says.
Thank you.
There's a lot of experience, of course, on the clinical side, and she has a lot of her patients vaccinated. So we're actually very interested to hear the Cyprus experience.
Thank you, Dr. Gastignodis. I would like to thank the Thalassemia International Federation, and especially Dr. Leftheriou and Dr. Gastignodis for organizing this interesting webinar and for inviting me to present our data. And of course, I would like to express my deep acknowledgement to my colleagues from Limassol, Larnaca, and Bafos Thalassemia Clinics, Dr. Haji Gabriel, Dr. Sidaru, and Dr. Dimitriou, who provided me with their data, which I will show soon. So I will present some epidemiological data for COVID-19 in Cyprus, just to relate with our data. On 29th of March, we had 326 new cases with COVID infection, and the positive percent is 0.59. And total infection in Cyprus is 44,631. And we have in Cyprus 252 deaths, 67% of which men and 33 women, and the average age of the persons is 79, and 2,057 persons recovered. I show the prevalence of the British mutation in Cyprus, which was on December and January of 2021 around 50%. On February was increased to 46.6%, and on February and March 95.5%. So that is increased. And the vaccines in Cyprus, the vaccination until 21st of March, 131,000 persons were vaccinated. 37,000 received 2 doses of the vaccine. And in vulnerable groups, 1,700 people have been vaccinated with the first dose of the vaccine. And in addition, 225 bedridden patients have been vaccinated at home with the first dose. So we proceed now for the hemoglobinopathies. In Cyprus, we have around 1,300 patients with different kinds of hemoglobinopathies. You see here the population in 4 different clinics, which we have in Cyprus. The majority of our patients have beta thalassemia, and around 500 patients with hemoglobinopathy H disease. This is the cases who have been infected with COVID-19 in Cyprus, hemoglobinopathy patients. And you see that we have 41 cases who were positive. It's around 3% of our population. 33% of whom they have beta thalassemia. It's 2% of our beta thalassemia patients became COVID positive. So all of the patients who were having COVID infection were 41. From them, 33 have beta thalassemia. It's 5.2% of our patients with beta thalassemia develop infection. The beta thalassemia patients who having COVID infection, the mean age is 43.9 and is between 5 to 65 years old. We have cases with H disease and the mean age is 43.9 years old, and the cases with sickle cell disease are younger, 29 years old. I just want to stress that 2 patients who were having COVID infection have been vaccinated with the first dose of the vaccine, but 717 and the second one 10 days before they got the infection. So maybe they didn't develop yet the antibodies. The main symptoms of our patients were, we had 2 patients who were asymptomatic, and these they were children. Fever is the most common symptom, 63%, cough 60%, fatigue 63%, loss of appetite 36%, loss of smell or taste 12%, headache 45%, shortness of breath 18%, sore throat 45%, drop of hemoglobin 33%, and they require more blood transfusion, increase of transaminase 24%. And this is the common symptoms, nasal congestion, and we only 5 patients were hospitalized, and this is the 15% of the positive patients. The days of hospitalization last from 3 to 7 days. They didn't require intensive care units, no need of ventilation, and all patients recovered. We didn't have any deaths, but I want to say that the symptoms in the second pandemic wave are more severe than in the first, and maybe is that related to British mutation. And this is the data about the vaccination in Cyprus. We have vaccinated 544 patients, 47% in general. With thalassemia, 60%, 371 patients. Alpha thalassemia, 155 and 46%. Sickle cell less, 46%. The number is smaller because we don't have so much patients, and some patients with hereditary spherocytosis.
Transplanted?
Yes, and 2 patients who have been transplanted. We have used the majority the AstraZeneca vaccine in 93%, and only in a small percentage, 6%, we use the Pfizer vaccine in Paphos clinic only. What side effects we had from the vaccines? First, that the side effects occur in more than 60% of our vaccinated persons. It's a very big percentage, yes. But the symptoms last from 1 to 3 days. They were mild and moderate, not severe, and all the patients recovered. And the more common symptoms are the shiver and chills, pyrexia, fever, fatigue, injection site tenderness, injection site pain, headache, myalgia, arthralgia. And the less common side effects is lymphadenopathy, decrease of appetite, nausea and vomiting, diarrhea, soreness, and we saw in 2 patients neutropenia. I am not sure if it's related, that's why I put the question mark. These are our data for the COVID, and I wanted to thank our medical staff in our clinic, Dr. Pankalo and Dr. Savidou, and of course the medical staff in the other clinics, Dr. Gabriel, Pete, Visita, Rupirovolaki, and Dimitriou, our nurses, and our secretarial staff, Mr. Rotsilis. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Christou. And there you are, Dr. Kassianos. You have plenty of data from the Cyprus hemoglobinopathy group, 60%, 90%, and more than 90% have received the AstraZeneca.
Of the vaccinated.
Of the vaccinated ones. So I think we are having real data as well from that. And important was the note of Dr. Christou saying that most of them had some side effects, but moderate, and they have recovered within 2 to 3 days. So this is very useful information. Thank you so much. If there is any comment on Dr. Sodiroulas or on the other presentations, otherwise we go directly into the questions. I think Dr. Kassianos, you feel that we should go to the questions, I suppose.
Yeah, that's fine. The problem that I have seen quite a lot in the questions is about venous thrombosis. In the UK, we have administered 14 million of AstraZeneca vaccines. We have not seen any cases of increased venous thrombosis or cerebral venous sinus thrombosis. In the United States, a safety committee for monitoring looked at just over 21,000 patients that had the AstraZeneca 1 dose to see if there was any signal there of thrombosis, and they found no increases in venous thrombosis and no increase in cerebral venous sinus thrombosis. So it is a mystery whether the vaccine is associated with an increased risk. In the UK, we are going ahead and vaccinating, but the MHRA has asked GPs and patients and nurses to observe this, that if the patient who has had the AstraZeneca vaccine complains of headaches for 4 days or more, they must be reported straight away because we need to look into thrombosis. But also, if the patient gets any bruises in areas not associated with the area where they had the vaccine, therefore thrombocytopenia, also to report it straight away. So that's basically where we are in the UK.
Okay, thank you. That's hopeful information, because the more data we have, obviously, the more confirmed decisions we can make on the next steps. There are some questions that are repetitive. Of course, a patient from India and Sindhu that they're asking whether any particular vaccine is more suitable for the patients with hemoglobinopathies, and whether Sinovac and AstraZeneca have efficacy, that's how it's written, of the use in thalassemia patients. I think this question has been answered repeatedly, but I would like Dr. Kassianos to once again clarify about the value of all the authorized vaccines, but I'm not sure if you can answer Dr. Kassianos about the Sinovac.
No, I can't, because we have not authorized in the UK. But generally, I can actually say that the one condition that was singled out in the extremely vulnerable, therefore they were vaccinated much earlier than people with chronic disease, was homozygous single cell anemia. Now, those patients came in when we were doing the transplant patients and the severe COPD and so on. But otherwise, we have not differentiated in which vaccine to give to patients who have had splenectomy or any other condition. Is whichever vaccine we had on that day, that's the one we gave.
Can you help us with the fact that Sinovac, the vaccine, the Chinese vaccine, is a viral attenuated vaccine? Therefore, is it a viral active vaccine? Because if that is so, it should be recommendations on the transplanted patients and on patients with immunosuppression, which are not supposed to receive such a vaccine. And amongst the thalassemia and hemoglobinopathy patients, there are transplanted patients, obviously, and both solid organ, and hematopoietic stem cell transplant, and they are receiving this vaccine.
Vaccines that use just the spike protein only deliver that. There is no other part of the virus, the SARS-CoV-2. While when you use the whole virus, you use a virus that you have actually killed, is inactivated. Now, there are companies that are using live virus, but it has been attenuated. That is to say, they have removed the ability to cause the disease. Now, how those two vaccine technologies, where they use the whole virus, whether attenuated live or inactivated dead, will actually perform, we don't know, because we haven't seen the publications as yet of the phase 3. So once we see that, we'll know a lot more about them.
So we have no disclosure on this phase 3 data. Dr. Diadis, do you have any more data on this? Or is Dr. Diadis around? No? Okay, but Dr. Kassianos has said so we cannot answer to the questions referring to this vaccine, to the Sinovac vaccine, because we have no data on the phase 3. So we have only data on the 3 authorized vaccines, and we can safely state that these are applicable to all hemoglobinopathy patients. We will be very happy and very pleased to receive data from the patients that are vaccinated, because this vaccine, Dr. Kassianos, is spreading across hemoglobinopathy patients, and we need to see how it performs to the patients who have been transplanted, who are immunosuppressed, asplenic, splenectomized. So there is a question there. Dr. Paul Telfer,
a much better experience with hemoglobinopathies than me. So, Paul, anything you'd like to say about that?
The question
you mean with regard to the Chinese vaccine? Do you mean?
To hemoglobinopathies generally, yes.
Yes. I'm not sure I have very much to add. I think that there would be the sort of general I guess recommendations about live attenuated vaccine, which I think is what the is the Chinese one, a live attenuated vaccine?
Yes, it is.
So my understanding is that those would not be recommended for patients on immunosuppression. That wouldn't include splenectomized patients.
Not splenectomized.
But it would include potentially some of the transplanted patients who are in the early stages after transplant.
Yeah, because that's what the recommendations are in the International Transplant Association, saying that live attenuated vaccines should be not used. These are the recommendations of the societies, and even patients go into this.
Yeah, but that would not apply to the vaccinations that we've been using up to now, which is the mRNA and the genetically engineered adenovirus.
Absolutely, absolutely. The authorized vaccines clearly are stated by all of you and Dr. Kassianos, and that can be used across the hemoglobinopathy patients. It's only about the vaccine for which we have no data in phase 3, and we cannot comment on their efficacy or even on being appropriate to be used in immunocompromised patients. So that is a question, remains a question. Any other questions?
Splenectomized patients.
From India.
I want to know about Covaxin and Covishield used in India. Is this safe for thalassemia patient? And I'm also splenectomized, the patient says.
What's Covaxin?
Covaxin, I think is...
Covishield.
Vaccine and Covishield.
Yeah.
Covishield.
I think AstraZeneca, Dr. Kassianos, I think that they are manufacturing now and they are reproducing the AstraZeneca in India. So perhaps that's what this person is talking about.
I'm not sure whether it refers to the same vaccine, but definitely a huge amount of AstraZeneca vaccine is produced by India, because India is the largest producer of vaccines, and we really rely on them for really spreading the vaccine around the world. Because as you know, the other thing about the AstraZeneca vaccine is produced and sold at cost. Now that is a huge advantage for the world in enabling really everybody to access the vaccines. So yes, India is producing a huge amount of AZ, but I'm not sure whether the vaccine that our colleague is mentioning is the AZ vaccine.
If a colleague is referring to the AstraZeneca produced in India, then it is safe to use. That's the answer. And we feel that Covaxin that our patient is referring is that one, but only if it's referring to AstraZeneca. We will, yes, all this information, we will be crossing it over, Dr. Kassianos, and see. Any other worries about vaccination, thalassemia, splenectomized? There is, we have covered that. Is it different between thalassemia? Please tell me different between, no, we are not answering these questions. Is splenectomy an independent risk factor for worse prognosis in UK cases with thalassemia, Dr. Telfer? That's a question.
We don't think so. We haven't. We will analyse that, but the impression is that it's not an independent risk factor.
That's what your British hematology said a few weeks ago when we were updating our. So it's not a risk factor on its own. Anonymous attendants, kindly share if there is any available data on the effects of the Sinopharm vaccine. We've already covered that there is no disclosure of the data of phase 3. So sadly, we'll see how we can get. Now, I have read that arguably vaccine will protect us from the virus for 6 to 12 months. If that happens and COVID pandemic is still going on, will there be another dose, a booster dose again and again? Of course, this is a question from all of us. Dr.
Yeah.
Kassianos?
In this case, there are two scenarios here. One is that, say in the UK, we continue to have the B117 first identified in the UK. And if we see that we still retain our antibodies and we're not getting infected, then there is no need to vaccinate us again until we see a drop in antibodies and infections. But on the other hand, if we actually get the one that was identified in South Africa or the P1 identified in Brazil, and we get it in the UK, then we will need to vaccinate against that variant. So there are two reasons to vaccinate: because you have got a new variant, and the second reason is because you are losing the immunity against the variant that you have, and you need a booster.
Okay, so two reasons why we should get a booster, either for a new variant or losing immunity and protection from the variant that we've been vaccinated for. And there was some news coming from the United States, I think, Red Cross, if I remember well, that in a big percentage of their blood donors, Dr. Telfer and Dr. Forni and Dr. Sotirolla, that they had antibodies, COVID-19, they had antibodies against SARS-CoV-2 in a very big proportion of these blood donors. Would this at all have influence, a positive influence, I should say, on the transfusion therapy of our patients? Would this be a sort of a situation that would help our patients, you know, getting blood with even a small proportion of the presence of SARS-CoV-2 antibodies?
I think I can probably answer that. The answer is probably no. So first of all, when you get transfused, the majority, the blood that you're given in nearly every country is depleted of plasma and serum, so that you're just getting red cells, and sometimes they're washed red cells as well. So it's the antibody-containing part of the blood is being removed. That's number one, and number two, there was a lot of work in using what we call convalescent plasma. So that is plasma that is collected from people who'd actually been infected, and to use that as a therapeutic product. And that was a project, certainly that was a study done in a number of countries, including the United Kingdom. And the current data coming out of those studies is it's not very protective. So the answer is that it's not going to be much effect. You need vaccination.
Absolutely, thank you very much. And okay. Also, Dr. Solomon, it does come to you the question about the Sinovac vaccine, because everyone is worried about not being able, any international expert, to actually comment on its value and effectiveness in patients. Your patients have been vaccinated, so I'm sure you'll be collecting information that would be very useful.
That's right. But what we are using here is Sinopharm, not Sinovac. Sinopharm is a Chinese vaccine. It is inactivated one. And this inactive one, we have a one trial here in UAE. We given to 31,000 population, and the efficacy was 86%. And this one report from Chinese in December 2020, I think it was giving 79% efficacy, 79% efficacy according to Chinese data. But this all the reports. Among our patients, we didn't find any problem, and even in some of our patients and in general population, they did antibody titer after vaccination with the second dose, after 2 weeks after second dose, and their titer against antibody, COVID antibody, it was high. It is more, I think, more than 200 in most cases I saw personally. So I think it is good, and as you know, what is the most appropriate vaccine now? That's one it is offered to you, not the one is you can choose or you can compare. We in pandemic, what is this offer? Take it. It will save your life and other lives.
I think this is a message with which we have to finish. And Dr. Kassianos, this is what you've said, and perhaps you can give us a last message for our patients globally. We'll collect all the questions. Dear participants, do not worry. You know how Thalassemia International Federation works. We'll collect all your answers, those that have not been answered or they have been partly answered. We'll make sure that our experts on this panel and perhaps whoever they suggest to us will be answering your questions. So the participants I should thank for their questions, and be sure that your questions will be answered in a few days appropriately. I need to thank each and every one of you for your time, and I'll give the floor to Dr. Kassianos to give us a last message across a patient population.
Yes, one of the things that we have not mentioned is the fact that the reason why we're giving 2 doses of the vaccine and not 1 is the fact that when you have got a new virus that none of us has come in contact with before, you need to give 1 dose first to prime the body, to prime the immune system, and then the second dose will ensure that you get long-term immunity as well. From then on, you never have 2 doses again. You only have 1 dose. Have we done this again before? Yes, we do it for influenza. Children under the age of 9 years, when they are having the vaccine for the first time, we give them 2 doses 1 month apart. So that's the important thing. I think in closing, I need to say that we are so lucky to have had scientists and public health that have worked so constantly hard to deliver to us a vaccine and a system that vaccinates people. And within 10 months, we were able to start vaccinating people against a very, very new virus. So we are really very thankful to our scientists. We are very thankful to vaccine manufacturers. And we are very thankful to our governments because they put their minds to really preventing that disease for us. And I think they don't get many thanks. They get a lot of accusations, but not many thanks. And I would really like to thank the governments across the world for their insistence in preventing disease that could actually be so detrimental to us. And finally, I would like to thank you for organizing this amazing meeting today, where so many opinions have been given, and for really people who share a common thing that we're all interested in hemoglobinopathy. And in my case, I'm very interested in thalassemia because I have the trait and I have passed it on to my 3 children here in the UK, although my wife is from Canada. So there you are. It's an international problem and we all work together to sort it out. Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing out the thanks to the government, to the scientists. I would like to add to your thanks to the World Health Organization that has been leading the way to the low and medium income countries, and to each one of you, to Dr. Forney. Are you still on? Yes? No? Okay. And Dr. Diedis?
No.
But please stay with us, Dr. Kassianos, because I'm sure we will have a continuation of this conversation and interaction, perhaps not in the context of the webinar or in the context of the webinar, but I'm sure in communication so that we can help these patients across. Thank you, Dr. Telfer. Thank you, Dr. Soliman, very, very much for this splendid, amazing interaction that we have had with you. Dr. Mike?
No, thank you. It's been an excellent meeting. Very informative, and I hope that the doctors, I noticed that quite a few doctors and patients have been following us, and I'm sure they have benefited from this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Christou. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You are one of us, and we usually forget to thank you because you are amongst our family.
Of course,
Thank you so much.